Welcome back. Welcome back. This is our season closer for the Discomfort Club. And I've never been both so happy and so sad to end before. So I want to welcome everyone, whether you're watching from Facebook or you're watching from LinkedIn Live. Please make sure that you let us know in the comments. Make sure that you are asking your questions. This is it, folks, for 2023. You won't get us again until 2024. So today we're going to hit all of those maybe uncomfortable questions, comments, concerns that maybe we did not get to earlier in the year. And I want to start out first by introducing Dez Stephens. Dez, welcome. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself before we really jump in?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me here. My name is Dez Stephens. My Indigenous name is Nibawi Makwa Ikwe, Standing Bear Woman. I am Anishinaabe, I am Creek, and I am Arcadian. So I'm happy to have this conversation during Native American Heritage Month.
Yes, thank you for that. And Ashton, everybody knows us if they've been here before, but maybe not. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself again too?
Yep. Hi, everyone. Thanks for showing up. I'm Ashton Applewhite, and I write and speak about ageism, age bias, what it is, what we can do about it, and how it intersects with other forms of bias and why all these struggles matter.
Yes. And I am Ayana King. I am the owner operator of Maximum Communications, and I facilitate diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops, educational seminars, keynotes all over the place, and most recently globally. So I'm excited about that. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. You know what? Before we actually jump right in, because we've got some good stuff to talk about, I want to actually open up. Maybe not just because it is Native American Heritage Month, but also because it is a personal goal of mine to make sure that every time I have a platform, every time I have an audience, I am acknowledging that the land that I live on, that I learn on, and that I love on was stolen from the Wyandotte people, okay? Was stolen from Indigenous people whose traditional and ancestral homes were here in Wyandotte, Michigan, and I want to acknowledge that. And so no matter where you are watching from in the United States, I want to encourage you just really quickly to find out about the land you are living on, all right? Go to nativeland.ca, not now, hopefully, but maybe write it down and find out about the land you are living on. And speaking of land acknowledgements, before we got on here live, Ashton, you had a really good question for Dez. You want to ask it again?
Sure. I was first introduced to land acknowledgements when I did a tour of Australia right before the pandemic. They had the first national anti-ageism campaign, and everywhere before someone spoke, they gave a land acknowledgement, and it was the first time I had seen it be routine. That this is in progressive circles, but still. And then I came back here and wondered, is it something I should do? Also, then there was the pandemic, so it seemed even weirder. Like, where is the server? Where are we all? But I got a really good answer from a group I was in, that a land acknowledgement, that you should reflect on your own history as for white people, as colonialists, as settlers. Where did your people come from, and where did they settle, and what was the effect? And that only if I did that work, it seemed a necessary precursor, but it also seemed like a really big ask. And I did start doing some looking into my own ancestry, but I sort of lost momentum. And now I'm wondering, I thoroughly understand what you just said, Ayana, about why it is important. We clearly need to acknowledge this, but how can I do it? And when could or should I do it in a way that is not just performative or virtue signaling? Look how woke I am, and now let's get down to business.
Yeah, right.
Love this question. I think for me, if I looked into my ancestry, which I have in terms of my DNA and my genealogy, things like that, I'm part white and I'm part Indigenous. So I could go down two of those rabbit holes. And I think it's a beautiful thing to do, but not all of us want to do our DNA. I understand why. I wish I hadn't in hindsight, now that I know what I know, but I know what my parts are. I know what my percentages are per, an ancestral DNA, bank that my, tissues are in now. But I also know at least most of the story about where my peoples come from. And I think saying it out loud is really beautiful. I think an e-signature can be really beautiful, saying things like, I live, I work, and I learn on the stolen, unceded land of, in my case, in Florida, where I live now, the Seminole, the Ayes. But I grew up in Chicago, so that was a different group of people, and I've lived elsewhere, and I've traveled elsewhere. So I think if it is performative, it will kind of be an empty shell of sorts. And I think most people that are well-intentioned when they do land acknowledgements, I think it's important to just ask yourself, do that inner work, go to Google if you have to, and reflect on why it might feel important to you. And if it is important to you, to do it in an authentic way that serves you well, and to follow simple guidance from people like Ayana, who says, I live, I work, and I learn, or I love, or whatever it is that you do there, in the place where someone used to be. And also you used to be somewhere else, right? Your body used to be somewhere else, your heritage, your cellular memory, familial, ancestral stuff, it's all in there. But I think we learn as we go, and sometimes it's a crash course, and sometimes it's a lifelong examination. So I really appreciate that people do it, and however they find to do it, I honor that as well.
Thank you.
And you feel like if your intention is sincere, that comes across.
Absolutely.
I'm always telling people that about talking about other stuff, so why wouldn't it apply to this?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we feel a little vulnerable, a little, our white fragility kind of shows up, right, real quick. But that's okay. It's part of the conversation. And if I get 1 degree closer to where I need to be, then great. Then here I am.
You know what, Des? I want to say something about authenticity and the performance piece, right? And I'm telling on myself because very recently, in the last 30 days or so, you and I worked together on a land acknowledgement for a partner of mine, a very dear partner and client of mine who is doing the work. They really are. They are not just saying the things, they're doing the things. And so I did my research using Google and other sites, okay? And I put together, right, with my heart, I really thought I did, this land acknowledgement. Okay, let me just tell you that the land acknowledgement, I like to write. I am a writer. I'm a lot of things, but I'm a writer too, okay? And so the words that I used were sincere. I used the word commitment. I used the word, respect and restorative. I used words that I thought really embodied what we were trying to do in our acknowledgement. And when I tell y'all that I gave this land acknowledgement to Dez, and she was like, chop, 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 chop. I was so thankful.
No, I'm kidding.
Okay, that's what it was. Okay, it was an arrow. It was something. I was grateful for that, though, because my heart was in the right place. But what you said, and I'll never forget, is you said you are using the colonizer's language. And I was like, damn. You are using words that really don't mean anything because your promises have been broken. Your treaties have been broken. That was really helpful for me. And so anybody who's looking on nativeland.ca right now, and please, if you know the land you're living on, please add it in the comments. I want you to listen to what Dez said about really being authentic. We use flowery words because we think somehow that makes whatever we're doing better. But a less is more approach might serve better here.
Yeah, it's part of our conditioning. If we sound verbose and important and serious in what we're saying, we're going to be considered an authority, right? So it's really just looking at our own language and looking at our own intention. And when there was, I think, an SNL skit that was hilarious about land acknowledgements where the audience said, well, but does that mean you're going to give your land back? And they said, well, I'm sorry. Well, no, not to that, So how far will you take it is the question. And it's not about a demand. It's not about atonement. It's not about forgiveness. Well, in a way it's about atonement, but we just individually and as groups and as businesses, as your client is, just considering, considering, respecting, or, the word respect, the Latin root of that word means to simply look at something. So if you look at it, you observe it, you notice it, and then you have a choice. And we all have choices, which is a beautiful thing in life.
I agree. So as we're thinking about going into the holiday, as we're having these conversations about not just land acknowledgments, but land everywhere, oppressed people everywhere. Why do you think it is so important that, especially around Thanksgiving, we begin to tell the true story of how this beloved holiday came to be? Why do you think that that's important, and what should people really know?
Well, I don't think shame and guilt should be part of it. That's the first thing I want to say. And, Ashton, I love the work you do, because when I was little, I used to think, why do I have to sit at the little table with the young people? Why do the older people get to sit at the big table, right? I was always ready to sit at the big table. So I think, Thanksgiving brings up in North America, let's just say, because Canadians observe it on a different day for a different reason. But let's just say in the US, we celebrate this in November, and it's a beautiful tradition that families come together and they give thanks for things. But it's based in some really problematic histories that we should at least be looking at. So, for example, Indigenous peoples, especially the Mashpee Wampanoag of Plymouth, Massachusetts area, it's a day of mourning. It's a national day of mourning, and it is a fasting for some. So we call it Thanksgiving or Friendsgiving. You'll hear, kind of a hybrid of that, where I'm going to have my friends over, we're going to give thanks. And we don't want to take away from that at all. But what we do want is the White House and schools. When I was growing up, I never learned beyond this fantasy, beyond this lie, what it really was. So it's not my fault I didn't learn that. It's not really my teacher's fault. It's not really the principal's fault. Maybe it's, we the people, right? So changes are being made, and that fantasy, that lie, is being exposed. So to talk about it in graphic detail at Thanksgiving is not ideal. But to ask yourself, what am I really celebrating? And what am I acknowledging along with it? So, for example, someone might say, well, I'm going to go to my Thanksgiving potluck, and I'm going to have friends, and family and laughter and fun and giving thanks and a fun day or whatever is happening, watching football, whatever people do. But also maybe in some internal way, acknowledging and potentially an outward expression of also what you're thinking and feeling. So that might be, this whole, breaking of the bread, fantasy that we were taught that, Indigenous peoples and colonizers, shared a meal together and they gave thanks, that's baloney, first of all. But when you start learning the real history, I think maybe before or after Thanksgiving, maybe not the day of Thanksgiving, and just kind of reflect and read and understand that maybe you might change some of your practices. Maybe you will acknowledge the food that you're eating because those are Indigenous foods. Maybe you'll acknowledge that it is not a celebratory holiday for all. And if you share Indigenous blood, your body might be feeling it as well, right? So I think that's a very personal thing, but I love the conversation. I will say that.
I think so too. And speaking of the conversation, we talk about being uncomfortable here every couple months. And people are feeling it right now, not just because of Thanksgiving, right? But all of the holidays. Here they come. All right. And some of our family, some of our friends are people who need to learn a different perspective, to hear a different version of history, which reminds me, Ashton, when you said you had done some of your own work about your lineage, I had recently been thinking about how come, other than the Quakers, okay, how come we don't hear, at least I don't, I shouldn't say we like it's never happened before, but I don't know of any white people, okay, who have abolitionists in their family, who are proud that their lineage is one of abolitionists. I just wonder, is that history secret still after all these generations? Is it secret? Do younger generations not know? Do older generations not care because they're embarrassed? I wonder about that. And then I also wonder about, how do we have these conversations?
I mean, I've heard the reverse from some friends, not reverse, that people discover that their ancestors were slave owners.
Right.
And,
Right. How
that's
come we never know about abolitionists? They had to have been there, right? We know that they were there. Or do we? I question history these days.
Start big families.
Listen, I mean, it's something that maybe I just have to go to the library. Maybe that information is out there and it's not readily available.
But isn't, just to be prickly, if I were like, okay, look up who the abolitionists were, where in like Pennsylvania Dutch country and Virginia is where different sides of my family come from. So it turns out I'm 17th cousin to so-and-so. Isn't that just sort of a way of letting myself off the hook, or saying, I'm like not, I'm a good guy, this need to not be, to see ourselves as good, as not perpetrators of harm?
Well, I have some thoughts about that I'll share, and then I'm interested in what you have to say, Des. I would say no, not as long as you're censoring yourself, not as long as you're trying to wear the cape, not as long as you're trying to be the hero. But if you are using that information, not just to post it all over social media, right? Because I want accolades, but if you are using that information to inspire, maybe to encourage people in your personal network, white people in your network, then I don't see it as something that is self-serving at all. In fact, I see that as the way forward. We need, in many ways, coalitions. We need solidarity. We need a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds saying things that maybe they would not say out loud, but saying it to people who are in their networks and who are in their communities. What do you think that does?
Speaking of prickly, I love how, BIPOC is a term that some of us use, some of us do not. But let's just, for sake of conversation here, if I'm having a conversation with Ayana, and I represent the I and she represents the B, there's a beautiful, tragic history of ours, shared history of about 500 years of oppression, marginalization, genocide, one coming to the Americas, another one being of the Americas. And that term, the Americas, is even problematic. But this is the language we're using, and this language is only 1,500 years old that we're speaking right now. Right. So this is a very short history, right? So when I think about things like the Norwegian in me, the Dutch and the French in me, colonizers, and the Native American in me, I have to reconcile that. But I don't have to do it with a self-shame or self-guilt. It's just more like, oh, well, isn't that interesting that part of my heritage is colonizing and the other part was colonized. So there's always going to be a give and take. There's always going to be a way back in my family, there was something happening. And in Indigenous cultures, we look forward 7 generations. We look back 7 generations. So a total of 14. And so if Ayana is examining where her peoples came from and were kidnapped from, those numbers are very interesting. And this is what we also do not learn in school. So if and I'll just ask Ashton just to show you an example of this. Ashton, in your school, was it a public school?
Yes, when I learned about Thanksgiving, yeah.
Were you ever taught about the Holocaust?
Not that I remember. I remember making a turkey out of my hand with the feathers.
And do you remember like pilgrims? Pilgrims in Africa. So were you taught a number of people who died in the Holocaust?
Later, yes.
Do you remember the number?
6 million.
Okay. Ayana, were you ever taught how many West Africans were stolen from the shores of West Africa?
No.
Okay. Do you know the number?
Numbers. I don't know the number.
Ashton, were you ever taught the numbers of the genocide here in the Americas, on North America, of Indigenous peoples, the number?
No, not.
Right. So this is my point. We're not taught this. So it's not our fault that we don't know this. We did not even have Google growing up, some of us, when we were like wondering about this kind of thing, right? So those numbers are very significant, in my opinion, because numbers matter. One is too many, but 11 million West Africans were kidnapped and stolen from West Africa. And it was almost 12 million, by the way, but only 10 million or so survived, meaning that they're in the water below South Africa. 300 people or so were on each boat, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, 20,000 or so times. And that number is approximately 11 million. The Holocaust number is actually more like 11, not 6, because it included non-Jewish people. The number of indigenous peoples who were desecrated on the North American continent, 11 million. So these 33 million people we're talking about. I know those numbers are very hard to understand in your brain because it's hard to even imagine a million, right? So Ayana, how many people live in Detroit?
Over that. That's funny that you said, it's not funny, but the imagery there, I was thinking about the city of Detroit, and I was thinking about like how all of those people being wiped out. I was also thinking, I don't want to get off topic, but I will for a moment. I was also thinking about how many people right now are being murdered in Gaza.
Right.
Thank you.
Those numbers do matter.
Yes, they do.
We
So Chicago, where I grew up, about 11 million, 10 to 11 million, something like that. That entire city, times 3. So, I mean, it just gives me goosebumps, when I think about it, when I feel about it. So I do think the numbers are important because when we learn the numbers, we learn the significance. And if you take a look at what's happening now in the Middle East, what's happening in Ukraine, seeing the connections to everything, this should not surprise anyone that this continues to happen. So I think the uncomfortable conversation here is, how do I not get overwhelmed, but how do I manage how I feel, think, and act as a result of this information? But most of us don't have the information, and that's on purpose.
So I want to bring up something that you said, which is, I'm paraphrasing, but resisting the urge to look away, not wanting to know the numbers, not wanting the information, feeling so paralyzed by the information, whether that's thinking about how many indigenous people were killed, displaced, how many Africans, how many folks how many Jewish people, how many folks, how many Palestinians. When you think about the numbers and you go, I can't do any of it. I want to caution people to look anyway. Look at the numbers anyway. Hear the information anyway. I am so tired of people saying it's too much. It's too much. Oh, my mental health won't let me. First of all, stop. Please try not to center yourself in all of this. Mental health is for real. We have to protect it. However, too many people choose to look away, and then we forgive them because we say, well, our mental health is fragile. Imagine the people who will be not celebrating Thanksgiving, but who will be mourning on Thanksgiving Day. Imagine how sick they feel. Imagine how upsetting it is for them.
You know what helps with mental health? Examination, reflection, healing. It happens when you look, not when you look away.
Yes. Yes. So
Lape's in the house. Brooklyn's in the house.
Yes. I see some folks here. Let me put up now. Listen, Dez, I might need help, okay? Because I don't want to be
not my nation, but I will try the best I can. Okay, so Kathy's coming in with Susquehannock, and Brooklyn is Leilani Lape. I have some beautiful Leilani Lape friends.
Perfect.
So Ayana, try to pronounce one of yours. Cherokee. Adam's coming in with Cherokee lands.
Yep. Adam said Cherokee. Mine is Wyandotte.
Nice.
I live, although the nation is spelled differently than our city is here in Michigan. But Wyandotte, Peoria, Miami. Don't let me say it wrong now. The Anishinaabe Waukee.
the Anishinaabe Moan.
Okay. And
So
the
yeah, so Anishinaabe, so this is really interesting. Adam's saying nation, which I think is really significant, to not say tribe, to not say clan. These are nations, right? So, for example, the White House has a website and they, quote, recognize 570 something, quote, tribes. Well, they're nations. It's the Cherokee Nation, it's the Apache Nation, it's the Cree Nation, it's the Leilani Lape Nation, right? So when we look at borders, treaty land rights that have been, broken and all that, it's really about kind of regions, right? The Sioux Nation, for example, covers like 6 United States. The Algonquin peoples are all part of, Canada, New York, it goes all the way to Michigan and all that. That's the Anishinaabe are part of the Algonquin. The Ojibwa, the Ojibwe, the Chippewa, they're all part of these larger peoples. So what's really interesting, I think, about this whole land grab conversation is that Indigenous peoples did not consider themselves owning the land. It was more like a collective. So when colonists said, oh, I would like to buy your land, the interpretation got lost in translation as in, oh, you want to be part of what we're doing? Yes, please come in and we will share the land. But what the colonists meant is we want to take the land. And I think it was 1830 or so when Manifest Destiny started, think of the audacity of the US government having stolen land and then giving it to Irish peoples, for example. Like, yes, go run out there to the west, go put that stake in the ground and get your 40 acres. The audacity, speaking of 40 acres and a mule, to give away, quote, free land that was not free. And the 30 million bison that were slaughtered to get rid of the food source for these people. So it's just, when you really look back and say like, this 500-year history is a pretty serious one. And we're a baby country, when you think about the United States. So 12,000 years ago is where the Mashpee Wampanoag date themselves back to. They are called the people of the light in the Plymouth, Massachusetts area. And they are very regretful, some of them, that they did even speak to the colonizers at this point. And many of the Narragansett and the Algonquin also said, you should have never done that with them. But here we are. And so I think you don't have to know everything. It's not about being overwhelmed. It's about starting the conversation with yourself and then potentially sharing that conversation with others.
Yes. And I think that has been really something that Ashton and I have been encouraging folks to do. Thank you, Adam. And thank you everyone who
I'm taking notes, by the way, when I look down. I'm not like bored.
No, this is something that Ashton and I have been encouraging folks to do since they've started joining us a few months ago, is when you learn something, don't hoard that information. Okay. Don't hoard that information. Don't use that information to somehow make yourself seem smarter than other people. Share it. Share it, but share it in circles where you have influence. Okay. Where people listen to you, where they respect you. Share it there. Listen, I'm sure, Dez, that you love to talk about this stuff, but you know it. You would probably much rather for people to be having these conversations outside of the ones they're having with you, but with people who don't know, people in their own communities. I think that's really important. And I think that is just such a challenge for us. And, here we go. We're coming around the dinner table soon. So
Ayana, do you remember when Oprah tried to find where in Africa she was from?
Yes.
That was a beautiful conversation to start, right? When she was like, wait, I'm not just from Africa. I'm from a country in Africa, because Africa is not a country, it's a continent. A lot of people don't know that, right? So again, this is like geography. If you don't know geography, that's not your fault. Maybe you don't retain knowledge. Maybe you are a different kind of learner. Maybe you can memorize more than other people. Spelling bee winners think they're smart because they have a good memory, right? It's not about memorizing things. It's about going somewhere on the internet or going somewhere geographically and just being in that space. So Ashton, for example, tell me some of your lineage, your ancestral lineage.
As far as I think you, I think I already did that. On my mother's side of the family, it's Virginia, And on my father's side, so-called Pennsylvania Dutch, which actually means German in Pennsylvania, also land of the Lenni Lenape, where I live now.
So further back.
I didn't go
Irish, Scottish, English.
Anglo-Saxo,
Okay.
all the way. Yeah.
So some of those people suffered too, right? This is not about, white people have it easy and non-white people don't.
Irish.
So the Irish, the Great Famine, there are many, many people who have suffered in many, many ways. So this is not a competition. It's not a comparison, but it's just like, you know what? If I'm of English descent, or if I'm of Irish descent, or whatever descent you are, it's just a conversation you're going to have with yourself, and possibly looking at Google, and possibly reading a book, talking to people. But it's really just about just learning what you need to learn for yourself to understand yourself, right? We all come from somewhere. We all originally came from tribes and clans. But today, in 2023, we better not be saying tribe unless we are tribal. And some people don't know that. I see, as a coach, I see, spirit tribe, Facebook group and stuff like that. I'm like, what's my spirit animal? And I'm like, ooh, but they don't know.
I have a question. I used to say about Old School, this clearinghouse that I co-founded, come to Old School and find your tools and your tribe. And I was called out. So the word, and I don't use it anymore because I know that person knows more than I do. The word is not okay ever in any context. Okay.
So there are tribes dating back tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, right? We all somewhere came from a clan or a tribe. In that context, it makes sense. But today, to say tribe is disrespectful because it's associated with Indigenous peoples. They are tribal. So no, there's tribal nations. And so if an Indigenous person says Soul Tribe, my Facebook group is called Soul Tribe, great. White person, not so much, right? And it's a little hard to navigate this sometimes. Like, I'll just give you one example. White sage. A lot of people say that's a closed practice, but Africans, ancient Africans, Cometians, including ancient Egyptians, they burned sage for different reasons much longer ago. So to say, you can't burn white sage, or you can burn sage but not white sage, it can become problematic and confusing to people. So I would say if something feels off, don't do it. If someone informs you that it's a little bit off, then consider it. And that's what we're all doing. We're considering how we are treating each other. For example, if I learned about some kind of international war and they said something about the tribes of this or the clans of this and the peoples of this, I would honor that because that's coming from that place. But for me, I don't use it, even though I'm part Indigenous, because I respect Indigenous peoples who use it and honor it in their culture. And I don't want to steal that or co-opt it.
That's good enough for me. Thank you.
And it's good enough for me too. I am so grateful to have you in my network, Dez, because, we have to learn with intention. And I think sometimes we use the excuse that we don't have anybody in our network, or we don't know anyone, or, we're not always willing to go to the library or find different resources. So I never want to take advantage of that. But I do want to say how grateful I am that you have been sharing really a lot with me about Indigenous cultures and communities. Bless you, Ashton. I hear you back there. So I want to jump right into, look at this. It's already 2:00. So let's go ahead and talk about,
Say one more thing. Sorry, really, really quick. So think about Gaza right now. Think about Israel. Those are Indigenous peoples in Gaza. So see how this Indigenous conversation is everywhere? What is the difference between, am I from here? Was I brought here? Did I establish here? So I just think this is an ongoing conversation that we're always going to have to look inward and also go to Google as needed, and go to the experts as needed. But not all of us have access to experts. That's for sure.
That's true. But looking with intention again, right? Doing things on purpose, questioning. I think it's really important for us to question what we have always known to be true and really ask ourselves, is it true? Is it really true? So, as we think about having these conversations, all the conversations around the Thanksgiving table, how are we doing it? Are we avoiding it? what kinds of things came up last year for some of you? I'd love to hear from you in the comments that you're trying to maybe avoid or navigate this year. And both Des, both you and Ashton, how's it going to be for you? Because the assumption is probably, especially the assumption for you, Des, is like, I think about my own assumptions and how they work. Oh, it's not going to be a problem for you. Because all of your family, they know what's up. They know the work that you do. You're not going to have to deal with any foolishness, but we never really know, right? So, that's a question for the audience. How are you all handling uncomfortable conversations? Or maybe a better question might be, are you handling them at all? What do you say, Ashton? I'm going to start with you.
Well, last Thanksgiving, I'm waiting for my children to like set up households somewhere else and invite me so that I don't have to wrestle with this stuff. But it's been at my house for a while, and it's a pretty big gathering. And my kid's dad comes, and this year both his brother and his sister, whom I like a lot more than I like him, are coming. So I'm delighted. It's a big clan, and I was horrified a year and a half ago to go, geez, I have never even mentioned the history of Thanksgiving. So last year I wrote out a little thing because I'm a writer and that's how I do. And I came up with I asked everyone in advance to bring a fact, something they hadn't known about the people on whose land they lived or grew up. Because I thought that was a way to ask people to do a little work, but it was a pretty light lift. And this year, you have already helped me a lot because I don't feel like I've carried through on some of the things I meant to do, like figure out how I might support the priorities of the Lenape Nation here in New York, where I am. And I also don't want to say like give money or show up at this picket line. I think that's too preachy. But so if you have any advice for this year, I am listening. But thanks to just being in conversation with you today, I have realized that I need to do some kind of land acknowledgement because it is important to me, even if it is then a stammering few sentences about how I'm still figuring out how to do this. And I've really liked, that it's about I'm looking at my notes and then it's on the other page. Starting a conversation with yourself.
Yes.
And this is a conversation that's important to me. So that's why I'm doing it. And I got to finish before y'all get to eat. So y'all have to listen. And
while the food is cooling off, right?
It is cooling. I always go short, but like I'm doing this because it feels important to me.
Yeah.
Well, I love that it's important to you. I will say that means a lot. It really does. And I think the emotional part of this is more significant than the factual part of this. When we express an acknowledgement, in this case, it would be an event acknowledgement, not a land acknowledgement, because the land acknowledgement would be more about the Mashpee Wampanoag in Plymouth. So Thanksgiving, I'll just give you a little bit of history. This is not something you're going to talk about on Thanksgiving, but I will just tell you as a precursor. Thanksgiving itself, after the first one in 1620, which is debatable that there was one earlier, but let's just say the first one was the Mashpee Wampanoag in Plymouth, Massachusetts, 1620, in September, not November. November, it became a national holiday later with Abraham Lincoln, but in 1637, I believe it was, near where Mystic, Connecticut is right now, there was a 700-person women, children slaughter the night before a, quote, Thanksgiving, where someone said, we're giving thanks to God for the slaughter that occurred yesterday. And the chief of sorry, I might have this nation wrong, but one of the chiefs that was involved in one of the Thanksgivings, the most prominent one, I believe in 1620, his son was murdered for the sins of his father, let's just say, and his head was put on a stake and left there for 25 years as a visual representation of colonialism. So those colonists, by the way, we're talking about Calvinists, Puritans, the Pilgrims, all this stuff. This is a very problematic. There's a rendering, an illustration of John Carver in Plymouth, where he was the governor of Plymouth, or I'm sorry, the governor of Massachusetts, maybe the governor of something, Plymouth, Massachusetts back then. And the chief of the Mashpee Wampanoag was sharing a peace pipe with him of tobacco as an offering. So that famous rendering kind of will, Google search, it'll show up when you Google search. And that day was a sharing of foods, indigenous foods with white people. And so that's that conjuring up of that fantasy is like, oh, they were breaking bread, right? But when you really think about Thanksgiving and the history, it is horrific, is what they were giving thanks to. So that thanks word is really the issue, right? So in modern day times, we can be thankful for what we know, what we don't know, what we're learning, how we're growing and expanding, and how we're honoring and acknowledging and respecting peoples, including ourselves, right? So I think an emotional event acknowledgement is more important than a land acknowledgement in that case. To just say, I honor the history of this holiday. I honor that it is a place where we give thanks now, but I also honor what that meant to other peoples and what harm that did to other peoples. I think you can say both and not make people feel bad. And I think people can just reflect. But imagine how awful that might feel if you are learning this for the first time right before that first bite. That first bite is not going to taste the same. You don't want to ruin the bite, right? I remember being younger. I was a vegetarian when I was 15, and my family every Thanksgiving, oh, are you too good to eat the turkey? I got a lot of that, right? Speaking of ageism, a lot of from the boomers and the Victorians, right? So my grandparents were very offended. My parents, boomers, were very confused. Me, Gen X, was like standing up for myself. My kids, different. So we have these generational viewpoints on things, which I think is a beautiful conversation on Thanksgiving, because typically we are meeting generationally on Thanksgiving, at least on a Zoom, sometimes we're, eating on a Zoom at this point, post-pandemic. So I think whatever way it works well for you, I think short and sweet, just like a land acknowledgement, works better than that. And, sharing your thoughts and your feelings about it and giving people an opportunity to share theirs as well.
I can commit to that. I can commit to an event acknowledgement. So that is my commitment. And I know my family will hold me to it. So if any of my family is watching, I want to hear that when you're ready to eat and I say, hold up, because I got something to say. Okay. Because I'm going to say it. Also, that's a loaded conversation right there. Okay. Just talking about the history of the holiday, the history of the land that we are on, that's already loaded. What do we do about some of those other uncomfortable conversations? I'm going to put this up from Adam and we can talk about it. Adam's going to be dealing with it probably, and he's not the only one, right? Some people that we engage with, they're ignorant in the true sense of the word. Sometimes they just downright hateful, but oftentimes just really ignorant. So, how are we dealing with that? Have you dealt with that in the past? Have either of you, had familial or events with friends where people are saying things that are just totally inappropriate? How did you handle that? Did you handle it at all? What do we think?
Oh, I have a lot to say about that one. Ignorance is not a choice, but hate is.
Yeah.
Okay. So I love these conversations. I love uncomfortable, discomfortable, conversations. I'm going to use that as a word now, discomfortable. So for example, when I was 15 years old and I was getting criticism for being a vegetarian at a meal that was meat centric, I did not really know how to speak for myself. I didn't know really what to say. I was just like, well, I just don't want to eat the turkey. This is what I say to people, because I'm, for the most part, a vegetarian still. If they say, oh, would you like some chicken? Like if I'm meeting at a friend's house, for dinner, I say, no, thank you. And if they say, oh, why don't you want, the chicken? I'll say, well, I don't eat birds. And then they're like, what? You don't eat birds? I'm like, I don't eat birds. And they're like, okay, like they get uncomfortable, right? But I'm just making a statement. I didn't say, well, I don't eat birds. I just say, well, I'm sorry, I don't eat birds, or I'm a vegetarian, right? Because I don't eat birds. I never have. I've never liked it. I don't have to explain to you why I don't eat birds. I just told you I don't eat birds. But thank you so much.
The end.
Yeah, the end. But if they want to keep having the conversation, I'm going to have it. I'm happy to share with them. I remember being in Honduras in Central America once. And actually, it was around Thanksgiving, but it was not a Thanksgiving meal, but it was a holiday meal. Imagine what the holidays coming up are going to feel like in terms of Jewish holidays, Kwanzaa, Boxing Day, Christmas, Thanksgiving, whatever these holidays are, these traditional end of year holidays. Well, that's going to hit a whole lot different this year, right? With what's happening in the Gaza Strip. It's going to hit a whole lot differently depending on who you are and where you are. For me, I love it when people bring this up in a snarky way, because I'm able to respond and not react. I share information, I share my feelings, I share my thoughts, I share what is true for me, and I don't do it with hostility. And I think that's just the best way to help educate and potentially inspire someone to do the same for themselves.
Yeah, it's really important to keep the snark out, tempting though it is. And Adam, your question is a version of one I'll often recommend and come back with, like, what do you mean by that? Without, without even the leaning the head for, but what do you mean by that? Another great one is tell me more. Which could come from either tell me more about why you don't eat chicken, tell me more about where you got that idea. Only leave out that part, because all too often people are just repeating something they've heard. And then you can get into, well, where'd you hear it? Or, it's what you want to do, of course, is set the stage for a conversation with the hopes of finding a meeting place. Although on the Gaza and Hamas situation, and thank you, Ayana, for bringing it up. It's just unbelievably hard to find common ground between the most well-meaning and thoughtful people.
And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Especially if you say that you are a humanitarian, especially if you say that you are an ally or an advocate. It's not hard to understand when babies have bombs being dropped on them that it is wrong. And, you shouldn't have to get your tongue all tied up in order to say that.
Yeah. Can I add something about ageism right here?
Yes.
I think
that's my job.
Ashton's work is so important because of what Ayana just said, which is a beautiful thing to say, that you want to protect babies, but so are the men, and so are the women, and so are the elders being.
Sure. I know. Why is it okay to kill men?
Right. Why is it okay to
not making a nonpartisan statement? It's as though it's only okay. It's awful to kill women and children and old people.
Where that comes from is that, propaganda with wars, that the men are needed and the women and children are being protected. And that's part of sexism, ageism, all of the all the isms, right?
Right.
So it's, if a 90-year-old man was killed, I should not be any lesser affected than if a 1-day-old female baby is killed.
And you know what? I also have to say it is about racism. It is about racism also, because these babies, these people, young, old, are brown. Okay.
All that too.
Yes. So, we have to say that too, because we have to call the thing, right? But I do wonder, just getting back to the Thanksgiving conversation, how would we even address this? Would we address it with our own families? What can you say? What are you going to say if your family says, well, their own people should be helping them? I know what I'm going to say. Smack, smack. I'm just kidding. I might feel like that. But
one thing I find myself saying is, oh, that's an interesting thing you just said out loud. It shocks me what people say. And it shocks me. It shouldn't shock me, but it shocks me what people are audacious. Audacious. I don't even know the word I'm trying. Audacity. How audacious it is of them to say it, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of do this, the little neck slap. The neck, whoa! I can't believe you just said that out loud. And then, like Ashton said, well, what do you mean by that? Can you say more about that?
Yeah.
Because I want to have the conversation, but I don't want to have an argument. I don't want to have a debate. And that's not what I'm signing up for. What I'm signing up for is speaking my truth and asking them what theirs is.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good internal litmus test. Is it something, if you're mulling through, what do you think, why do you think it, if it's something you're wondering whether or not you should say out loud, listen to that little voice.
Most
Yeah.
people don't.
Yeah, because there's probably you probably have some sense or have heard from someone that it is harmful or hurtful or unexamined, and that we do need to listen to that. But then again, super easy, I'll throw this back at you two, to use that as an excuse to say nothing.
Listen.
This is the common, I don't want to talk politics, right? Well, you know what? Politics are people. And if I want to talk about people on a people holiday, I'm going to do it. And you can kick me out and you can tell me to shut up, but I'm still going to sit here. When I was 15 and I was not eating the bird, I was eating everything else. I wasn't saying anything. I wasn't being disrespectful to anyone, but everyone was attacking me. And to me, that is saying they're projecting their bias on me. And there's not much I can do about that when I'm 15. But now, as an older person, I can say, you know what? That is rooted in something that is theirs. It is not about me. And the best I can do is to stay positive and just move forward in my best way. That's what I choose to do.
And you know what? For me, I have to say that I don't have to be in a relationship with people who are hateful.
But you have to be in a relationship with your family.
Listen, I don't have to be.
Yeah.
I do not have to be. Thankfully, my family, are not people that it's an issue for. And, it's not a issue for most people in my family and my extended family. But there are some people I choose not to be around, whether in my family or in networking or business circles, in extended friendship circles. I don't have to be in relationship with you. And it really isn't. So I have a job, right? My job is my business, and I share with people the things that I'm passionate about. My job is not to try to convince somebody who is hell-bent on being ignorant. Away with you. Away with you. You don't get to be in my space. You don't get to have my energy. Away with you. So when I ask the question, what are we willing to do? Or what are we willing to say or not say? Sometimes it's just that when I get that invitation from them people that, they turn my stomach when I'm around them, I ain't gotta go. I don't have to be there.
Ayana, do you remember the story about Maya Angelou and Oprah Winfrey at Maya's house when she kicked someone out? Did you hear the story ever?
Oh, tell it.
So Maya Angelou had a one strike and you're out policy. And I love what Lori Jo was just saying in the chat, by the way, about she has quiet holidays because of the boundaries. I love that. Nice, quiet holidays, because we don't talk about politics, right? So Maya had guests over. Oprah was one of them. And in her home, it was not a 3-strike and you're out kind of home. It was one time you say anything racist or colorist, you will leave. You will never come back. And some people were joking. They were joking about, this is at Maya's house and Oprah's one of the guests. Maybe about 20 people were there for dinner. And Oprah and someone else, 2 other people, were joking, but it was kind of a racist joke, like they didn't realize how racist it was until Maya was like, and she kicked 2 people out. Oprah was almost one of them, and they were never allowed back in her home. Later in her life, she said something like, well, I'm willing to have a conversation with them, but not in my home. And Phyllis Young, the matriarch of the Standing Rock Sioux, is the same way. She does not allow anyone in her home who does anything behaviorally or verbally, or even with their body language, something that she would consider inappropriate. And it's one strike and you're out. You are never allowed to come back in my home, or you're never allowed to be invited to my home. So I think those strong boundaries really do make a difference. And Ayana, I think family members, friends, and colleagues might come back around and say, I have looked things up. I have researched, I have reflected, and thank you so much for those words of strong boundary you had with me, because now I know better.
And it's a good way to get people to think before they open their mouths.
Yes. And I don't want people to be afraid to talk around me, especially like if I have you, if you are in my spaces, because like there's some level of comfort that I have with you. Otherwise, I ain't messing with you at all. Okay. I'm just not. That's my personality. But I want there to be dialogue. I want there to be conversation. And I know that we were specifically talking about racism and colorism, but listen, that goes for folks who are transphobic. That goes for people who are, slanderous and hateful to anybody from the LGBTQ community. That's about folks who are ableist. All the ists and isms, away with you, man. Away with you. I don't have time for it. And I only work with people who I connect with energetically. Okay, so if I got to try to twist your arm to care about somebody else, you're not gonna see me. You're just not going to see me. So we've got just a few minutes here. I would love for you all, if you have questions, now's the time, y'all. Again, this is the season closer today.
I'd love to know how other people, what other people have done or are dreading or planning to do or wondering whether they should do.
Are you staying home to avoid? No shame. I just told you I don't deal with people sometimes. I could be a hermit. I think I could be so outgoing sometimes, and so cold other times. I am learning myself in a lot of ways, like that I can be that way.
And we don't want to get into self-policing. If I say the wrong thing and I'm doing it wrong and I'm saying, this is really about simplicity. Yes. Right. Getting back to simple concepts like family, community, conjoining, sharing meals, breaking bread together, giving thanks. When we go around a table at Thanksgiving and we ask our family members or whoever we're meeting with, what are you grateful for this year or today, in this moment? That's a beautiful ritual, and we don't have a lot of rituals in our culture.
Yeah.
So we certainly don't want to take away from that, but we need to self-manage. Kind of like what Ayana, you were just saying, is I need to manage my energy around this. And I can't have things take away from my energy. I have so little of it myself. Yes. And it's not about isolating myself. It's about just managing my time and energy and keeping, I want to make it's a holiday. I want to celebrate something. Yeah. And what am I celebrating? And it's not about like, oh, I don't want to celebrate something that is a problem. It's like, well, what do I want to celebrate instead? Acknowledging what should not have never been celebrated. Right? Kind of like a dichotomy there.
Yeah.
I mean, something about this has helped me see. I mean, I will be the oldest person in the room. And it is my house. And that I have a responsibility primarily to myself. I see that now, but to speak up.
Yes. Yes. I love that.
To set an example.
Yes.
Is that ageist?
Yeah, it's kind of like, the oldest. Okay, so I love what you just said, because like this elder concept is not really respected in our culture, right?
And I don't like it. I shy away from it like crazy. I don't think older people get the mic more than younger people.
That's part of your conditioning, though. And denying your conditioning is part of your conditioning.
I mean, I know that elder is a term in Indigenous communities.
It just means someone older. That's all it means. It's an older person that shares what they know. That's all it means. It doesn't mean like, oh, I'm a shaman. Oh, I'm a medicine man or woman, right? It just means you're older, and you're a crone, right? Like embracing the crone. That's what this is about, right? So we used to live together multi-generationally, 3 different generations living together and sharing meals together and all that. And I love how they're all coming to your home. So it's really about how you honor yourself and how they're honoring coming to the grandmother's house or the mother's house, sharing a holiday. It's a beautiful thing. So the last thing we want to do is like make it seem all all of a sudden, but also just like sharing what we would like to share, right? Maybe that's an email ahead of time. Maybe that's an acknowledgement afterward. I don't know. We all have to kind of figure this out, but we at least have the opportunity.
And in the spirit of sharing, because look at what time it is already, I have to share some things right now. First of all, I have to share my adoration for the both of you. I love you ladies so much. And one of the things that was really important for me in 2023 specifically was, I'm not going to say building my tribe, Dez. I almost said it. building my community with intention that was multi-generational, it was multicultural, it was all the differences in all the ways, because that's one of the best ways that I learn. And that was just important to me. So I want to thank you for that. And in the spirit of sharing, I want to share, number one, Dez, where the folks can find you. I know that you do wellness coaches all over. So please reach out to Dez. You can find her on LinkedIn, but you can also find her at radiantcoaches.com. Dez, we didn't even get a chance to talk about it, but I also want to share the film that you co-executive produced, End of the Line. This is a film about the women of Standing Rock. Please, you all, go there. Also, you give out a lot of really great information. You never charge for it. And you wouldn't ask, not in this context, but I know that your elder is very important to you. And so if you all have a giving heart this season and you want to be able to give back to Indigenous communities, please go to strongheartbear.com and do that. Ashton, of course, oldschool.info. Go find the resources, people. They are there. And is there anything else that I missed or that you all, besides this, I'm going to put this up on the way out. Ashton, you have anything you want to share on the way out?
Only that my personal website is thischairrocks.com, and I write about all of this stuff I've been thinking out loud for free on the website. Almost everything on Old School is free too. There's a lot about
this chair.
I'm going to
chat really quick.
Oh, I like that.
Let me put it in.
What about your .com?
Let me put this in here. This chair rocks.
I love that.
Okay, I'll put mine in there too. Hold on. There we go. Thischairrocks.com. That's where you can find Ashton. You know that you can find Dez here at Radiant Coaches, and you can find me. Where can you find me, child? Get Max Combs. My gosh, ladies.
And talk at the same time.
There we go. So I want to thank you all for being here. I hope that you heard what we said today. I hope that you internalize it. I hope that if you learn something new, you don't hoard the information for yourself, but that you share it. And I really do hope that you have a peaceful and thought-provoking Thanksgiving holiday. Dez, Ashton, as always, I appreciate the both of you. And I feel like we're going to do this again. So please. To the both of you, to all of you, thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. I appreciate you so much. And we'll see you again with the Discomfort Club, but not until 2024, y'all. So we'll see you then. Thanks,
Happy
everybody.
holidays, everyone.
Thank you.